Hello, and welcome to LeaderFolk, an inclusive look inside the Jewish community. I'm your host, Sarah Bugmolny. I'm so thrilled to welcome our guest today, Aliza Kline. Aliza was the founding executive director of Mayim Chaim Community Mikveh and Education Center in Boston, and is now the founding executive director of OneTable. Welcome, Aliza.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for being here. When we set out to create this podcast, my colleague Libby Barker and I were particularly interested in elevating the voices of women, non-binary, and genderqueer individuals who serve our Jewish community as professionals, as clergy, or lay leaders, and to make sure that we were representing the full spectrum of what a Jewish practice, identity, and community looks like. So as we jump into our conversation, I would love to know, Aliza, what is your personal relationship with Judaism, and how does that translate into your path as a social entrepreneur and a community innovator?
Oh, what a great question, Sarah. And also what a great mission. I really feel like I have devoted a whole lot of my career to ensuring that the richness of Jewish ritual practice is as accessible and can be owned by as many different people as possible. So in terms of my own relationship with Judaism, I would call myself kind of a ritualist, meaning I am a person who is most inspired by, driven by, influenced by action. And ritual to me is about doing things. It's ritual at its best grounds us. It is visceral. So whether it is about a song that we're singing, a meditation that we are practicing, a grasp of another person, wrapping ourselves in a talit, immersing an entire body in the warm waters of a mikveh, baking a challah and sharing it, any of these moments, I think they enrich our lives and allow us moments to feel fully present, connected to ourselves, to each other, to God, to our for parents, right? The mothers and fathers and ancestors who have shaped us. And in some moments, also the timelessness of who is around us now and who, please God, will come after. I think all of that can be wrapped up in these moments of sanctity. And that's really what has always been for me the central connection to Judaism and Jewish practice. I was raised by a dancer and a rabbi. So I'm a hybrid. And that means that there was always kind of a conscious design around the way in which we would engage with Jewish ritual. My parents themselves came from very different Jewish experiences, and they were really intentional about the way we approached holidays, setting the stage. Really, there was a lot of performance in my family, whether it's on the bima or the bama, right? Like the stage in both ways, and thinking about the aesthetic and the feel and the taste and the smell. And my sister is a musician, my brother is a teacher and a poet. I build organizations, but they are organizations that are also really fundamentally based on ritual. So we've all been deeply affected, but none of us strayed too far, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear a lot of what you're saying about ritual and the ways that it can perhaps be personalized and customized. And I think that held true with your work at Mayim Chaim with the mikveh, and now with OneTable in the approach to the Friday night Shabbat dinner. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that idea of customizing rituals, especially given our current situation in relationship to the COVID-19 pandemic and the social distancing measures that are greatly affecting the ways that people are approaching their Jewish practices, perhaps, affecting Seders as we look towards Passover later this week.
Great. So I think the first thing is an acknowledgement of how much we have been personalizing and customizing, tailoring Jewish ritual for forever. No two home-based rituals especially look exactly the same. And if you've been to even more than one Jewish institution, there are pieces that are consistent, but it's always different. It's always different because it's led by humans. So we have prayers, but we have been adapting the language around them, the tunes, whether they are murmured or shouted. All of these things have been changing for forever. So I think that is really important. And I learned with mikvah, which is a ritual bath. It's a pool of naturally collected water. It's not magical at all. It's the intention that you put into the immersion that makes the experience a holy one. And the idea is that as long as the water is collected in a certain way, no matter who goes in that water or what their intention is, it never takes it away. It never takes away the sanctity for anyone else. It's about the person who uses it, one person at a time. That to me is an invitation for creativity. And I think the same thing happens, around the Shabbat dinner table. We all have collectively carved out this moment of the week where we exhale, but what we do next and with whom we celebrate and how we approach it is all different, and it varies person to person. And again, I think that is just the beauty, which is the kind of the elasticity, the strength of Jewish ritual comes from its ability to be so malleable. If it were rigid and fixed, it would have broken and become irrelevant a long time ago. When it comes to this new reality that we are still navigating, I think there are a few different things that at least I've observed in the past few weeks. The first is that it is incredibly difficult to figure out what time it is, what day of the week it is. Just our sense of location and time is upended. And we have this ritual, which is grounded in time, right? As a palace in time. That's where we learn from Abraham Joshua Heschel in terms of framing Shabbat. We can count our days. The way the Jewish calendar works is that we have Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, day 1, day 2. We count up till we get to day 6, which is Friday, and then Shabbat starts Friday night. We literally count time based in this way. And I think that, the creators who imagined that we might need to count time this way understood that, it's hard to figure out and hard to ground ourselves, and ritual can help us do that. There was a resurgence and people looking to create Shabbat. The first thing that we ran out of all over the world was yeast and flour. Now, not everybody's making challah, to be fair, but a whole lot more people are making challah than ever did before, and posting pictures of it. And that is fascinating to me. I think that the possibility of sort of democratizing ritual where we can own it ourselves and practice it in ways that work for ourselves, especially when we cannot come together communally, cannot have a rabbi leading us in quite the same way. That to me is sort of the positive. And I see Shabbat in particular as serving as an anchor that helps people just understand where we are in the world and how is time passing. I think in the frame of Passover, there are obviously a lot of themes in the story, but one of them is the resilience and the strength of our people. We survived very different realities in our myth, and we are now also surviving very different realities. So there is a reassurance that, that Judaism can be a bedrock, can be a reassuring history that we can share with each other, that we can collectively acknowledge, okay, now we're all shifting and thinking about this holiday in a way that helps us connect, even at a time when we're so disconnected. But the other piece I would say to that is, just as we've been personalizing ritual for forever, and just as it's been elastic forever, people have been alone by themselves and isolated for forever. And right now, there is a different opportunity to pay attention to that. One of the first things that we did, on March 12th, when we pivoted within my own organization, OneTable, was we created a resource called Shabbat Shalom. Right? Because there's people who are really by themselves, in studio apartments, in one-bedroom apartments, in homes. There are people that's in the OneTable demographic, and there are people who are divorced or widowed or never had a partner, or whose children have grown, or they did not have children, or they are grandparents. There are just people all over in various stages of life. And now we as a whole universe are thinking, we have empathy for what it feels like to be that way. And we also have opportunities to think about, who have you called today? Who are you connecting with? And we're building in new rituals, right? Like, what's your daily ritual for feeling connected to other people? So I think that is shifting as well. And the last piece is that this is hard as hell. And there's grief and there's loss. And probably one of the most painful pieces right now is that, one of the things that Jews, I think, do well is mourn and support each other in community when there's a loss. And we're really feeling that absence. I have a colleague who, wrote an article for Tablet magazine about sitting Shiva alone. I have participated already in multiple virtual Shivas. And that definitely can show support and love. And it also, is not the same of physically being with people. And so there's also just mourning the loss of that normalcy, and trying to find the right prayer or intention or kavanah to share with someone. So even though it's not Yom Kippur yet, and please God, the world will be different by then, I do think there is some forgiveness that we can practice and think about what that own sort of Kippurim is, right? Like, whether it's forgiving ourselves. Some people need to forgive God. There's a lot of anger right now. Forgiving, the great aunt on the Zoom for the Seder who simply cannot figure out how to mute herself, right? Forgiving just the way that we are acknowledging this, and that it's not the way we designed the world. And what's the loving kindness practice and forgiveness that we can practice, and how does that enrich our Jewish existence? So that's the piece that I'm sort of really thinking about and struggling with right now.
Yeah, I'm very moved by a lot of what you've said. I am particularly moved by what you've been talking about in terms of loneliness, especially given, I think, how many people my age, and I'm 25, so I'm like definitely in that millennial group that already has maybe at times struggled to find how their place in the Jewish community compares to those of the generations above them. And I know I can speak personally and say that my own relationship with Judaism has definitely evolved even in the past few weeks since we all started staying at home. And exactly what you were talking about in terms of measuring time, we're observing Shabbat in our own ways, but certainly with more intention than usual. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on how individual relationships with Judaism will develop as a result of this distancing, and whether you see any kind of long-lasting, maybe even benefits in terms of like the introspection that comes from this kind of event.
Sarah, first off, thanks for sharing your own experience. I can tell you about the conversations I've had this week, and they've really kind of run the gamut, right? So I spoke with one person who's really angry with God and questioning God's existence or any relationship to a higher power, and is thinking about their own connection to Jewish practice, but sort of divorcing it a bit from some of the sanctity that he might have infused it before. And others I have seen, really taking this moment of dumiyah, of stillness and quiet, and, practicing a little bit more of that question and introspection than in the past. I, in the past couple of years, have started studying more Chassidut, just a totally different way of engaging with Jewish text that has, I think, incredibly, comes from my perspective, an incredibly emotional perspective. And looking at texts that I've looked at so many times, but from this perspective of finding understanding the urges and the voices inside of me and how to name those and invite them out. So I think that there is absolutely a moment where there are because everybody is sort of there's a leveling of the playing field. Like you mentioned the distinction between the generations. I think that's really a keen observation, right? There are those for whom Jewish community is organizational. It is the synagogue or the JCC or the summer camp or the museum, but it is a connection, and it is physically based even in a building or in a neighborhood. And there is such a loss, a profound loss, but there are so many more for whom those institutions themselves did not feel like home. And so they've been creatively developing their own ways of feeling connected in their homes, in the woods, on meditation blankets and yoga studios. And now there is a leveling of that playing field where we all have to figure out, we all have access. Like there's services online in every language, in every time zone, by every different kind of rabbi that anyone can gain access to, regardless of their membership, their affiliation, their personal wealth. And at the same time, there's actually an advantage to those of us who already were comfortable with technology and already were comfortable with creating things on our own. And I see older generations really learning from younger generations in a way that they hadn't in the past. There had been a dismissiveness in some cases about young people who had chosen not to affiliate with traditional institutions. And now that is flipped a bit, right? There is a resilience that people who've been creating their own practice have now, that they can share and, sort of generously introduce to other generations. That's a pretty general way of answering your question. But I definitely think there is kind of this like leveling and reframing of what it means to connect with community in a new way now.
Right, definitely. So I'm curious if you would talk a little bit more as well about this Shabbat Shalom that you're working at with OneTable, or other ways that I think you mentioned a pivot as we entered this time, what that looks like, how you are, continuing to serve this community in the beautiful ways that you've developed over the past few years.
Yes, absolutely. So there was, as soon as we understood the full impact of sort of the new reality, we had about 1,000 upcoming dinners that were posted on the OneTable platform, which operates a little like Airbnb. So there are host profiles and guest profiles, and hosts open up, generally speaking, their homes to an average of about 11 people at a time. We do about 250 of these a week, which meant there were at least about 3,000 people that were planning on joining in person on March 13th. And on Thursday, March 12th, we understood, collectively for the first time that, we needed to actually take responsibility and change that. And so our team shifted and reached out to everybody to introduce either shelter in place Shabbats. So if you are either all by yourself, hence Shabbat Shalom, or you are with your roommates, with your beloved, with the people that you are physically living, how do you recreate that space so that can become a sacred Shabbat, especially since we have been pushing for years and years and strongly encouraging, incentivizing, and supporting people to open up their homes and invite people they didn't know and have in-person interactions, go online on the platform, to go offline to meet in person. That had been, the full emphasis of our work.
Right.
And so the quick shift was like, and at first it was like loss, right? Like, oh, loss. Like, how? Okay, so we can't do this, we can do that. We can't do this, we can do that. By the second week, we had change the technology itself so that there were opportunities to post a virtual Shabbat, like literally just changing the address from a physical address to a URL, and then starting to have different ways that people might connect and seeing really creative solutions where folks across the country, sometimes they would sort of cook in parallel, put the same objects on their table, starting to play games together or sing songs together, whatever they could using in some cases using technology, and also now having Shabbat with people that they couldn't normally because, they live across the world, for example. So that was really interesting. The next thing that started happening right away was, like many creative institutions, was creating sort of OneTable Live. We did a Shabbat where the candle lighting was in Florida, and there was then a meditation yoga in Denver, and then she handed it off to Chicago for Kiddush and back to New York for Hamotzi. The idea was like, and if 5,000 people very quickly could at least feel connected to Shabbat ritual and feel like they were not alone. Since that week, we've done cooking classes and ritual practice and poetry Shabbats and sing-alongs and just using all different types of resources, because the main thing that I don't see changing that is super interesting is that there are people who are natural hosts, and then there's the rest of us. And in the OneTable universe, we've had about 150,000 people participate in our dinners, but less than 10% of those are the hosts. It's around 9,000 actually, and the rest have been guests, sometimes many times over. So to assume that everybody who used to be a guest is now going to host her own dinner in her home is unlikely. So it's really important to continue offering opportunities for other people to still be that guest. And the big shift, in addition to those three, right, to the shelter in place, to the virtual Shabbat, and to the live programs, was to create Seder 2020, which is a two-part website. There's the whole set of resources, Haggadot, that you can easily download and share, or links to Haggadot.com so you can create your own. There are tips for hosting a virtual Seder that should be resonant for people well beyond the OneTable demographic, people at all different stages of life. And then there is the platform itself. So we took the same OneTable technology, we white labeled it, which means we use the same back end, but it's rebranded for Seder, not for Shabbat, and open to anybody. So all told, there's about 800 Seders right now that are being featured and hosted on the OneTable platforms, between the OneTable as it is and the Seder 2020. And so far, close to 50,000 people have visited the site for resources. There was sort of a sigh of relief that I heard from many, like, oh, thank God, I just did not know where to begin. And this is not an end. Hopefully it's just a beginning. We've just learned so much over the past 5 years about how to help people find each other. There are indeed 50% of the Seders hosted are open, and anybody can request a seat. I have people coming to my Seder who I've never met from across the country, and I've learned some beautiful things about them. And, if this allows people like that to connect with each other, that is a really beautiful thing.
I think it's beautiful and moving to hear that the work that you do to connect the community year-round during normal circumstances not only continues, but has grown to continue to ground people in that kind of metronome of time with Shabbat and with the Seder. So thank you so much for rising to this very difficult challenge that we are all going through together, and continuing to help us all find meaning and connection and groundedness through a Jewish practice.
Thank you, Sarah.
So before we sign off, Aliza, I want to ask if there are any social media platforms or places where listeners can go to find more information, either about you or the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think that OneTable's Instagram channel is just stunning. It's OneTable Shabbat. There's constant, beautiful resources and images put there. We have somewhat of an active presence in other channels, but really that's the strongest one. There is a very sweet TikTok video about transferring your home to a sacred space. Because so much of us are around the dinner table, but that's a little bit more fun than sacred. But you can certainly find me on those channels as well, but I'm less prolific than my talented communications team, who are just lovely geniuses. And every time we find resources that we can either create or share, we're eager to do so. The idea is less to be content generators and more to be a platform to support lots of other people to create and share their own content. That is what, it brings me so much joy. I love nothing more than hearing about somebody who learns for the first time that they can have access to these resources and can create something that they're proud of. That fills me with so much joy. And even in this incredibly challenging time, when I see the creativity flourish, I'm confident that we will come out strong on the other end.
Great. I just have one final question for you, which
Yes.
is, what are you most looking forward to when social distancing is over?
Oh, I'm going to say hugging my parents. My dad's 85. My mom is 80. They live 4 blocks away. And I have been able to wave at them and talk to them from a distance, but I know how much they're yearning. And the truth is, I would probably have to get out of the way and put my children in front of me. That's who they really want to hug. But I would, I feel like we could just be so generous with our physical, with affection. And I want to see them be just, love bombed, just attacked from all sides with hugs and kisses. That would really be so fulfilling.
Yes. Well, I hope that moment comes for you and your family and for all of us absolutely as soon as possible.
Amen.
Aliza, thank you so much for joining us today on LeaderFolk. Have a Chag Pesach Sameach to the best of our abilities during this very strange time. And have a great day.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
LeaderFolk is all about elevating voices and starting conversations. So now we'd love to hear from you. Email us at podcast@tcjewfolk.com to share your thoughts, your ideas, or to nominate future guests. LeaderFolk is a project of JewFolk Inc. and the JewFolk Podcast Network. For more information, visit tcjewfolk.com/podcast.